Reframing Mindset podcast, where I clear my head of the thoughts that are preventing clarity, practice my speech, among other things. Episodes range from informative knowledge to funny stories about my experiences, and in the future, maybe include interviews. So subscribe and enjoy. Episodes drop every other day. Okay, welcome back to Reframe Mindset podcast. My name is Francis. And this episode I talk about the so 40 of ownership and stuff like that. We talk about stuff like once I mentioned about lights and light bulb and all this stuff. I'm like, okay, now you have to pay for electricity and all these stuff, lights and all this. All basic stuff. But what happens that in my home you have lamp. So what happens that say you have people living life I can't do. So for people so talking about AC, and this is the thing we're talk about AC and solar and all this stuff. All this stuff. And we have light, light bulb and all this stuff. And what happens that if you have things like dining room, kitchen, and all this stuff, you have light bulbs. And what happens that this is the fourth year lesson going on, and I'll be like, oh, you will tend to be like, okay, yeah, I'm out there making a lot of money and all this stuff. I can afford to actually keep the lights on, light bulbs on and stuff like that, and be like, okay, yeah, it's not an issue one and two time. I can afford it and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, and those, yeah, you can afford it, and yeah, that may be the case, or you can afford it, you'll be like, oh, but one of the issue is if you're actually growing up and stuff like that, you'll be like, oh, they were being the tall person or not being tall, and I'll be like, oh my god, every time the light bulb finish, that's really related to the episode, everything about shelf life. When the light bulb start working, you have to actually climb up on a table and change the light bulb and all these stuff and be like, oh my god, you have to do those stuff and things like that. Be like, oh yeah, there are plenty and this is for this episode, be like, oh, there's plenty of solution for each of these stuff. But I'm telling you, this is the reason why for this episode, will be like, oh, when you actually break through those struggles and stuff like that, those will be like, oh, the old days. Remember those days and all these stuff. But what happens that you have to actually regurgitate this because you don't know when your time of shortage will come and the necessity will come back. So what I realized was that I actually was that lamps. So the reason for using things like lamps and all these stuff is actually, for one, extend the life of the light bulb. Extend the life of the light bulb that is in the ceiling of the of the roof. That's the basic reason for those things. And what happens that, and this is the reason we're going like, oh, 40 ownership and stuff like this. Actually, most of this stuff, and this is the reason why the episode we call useless thing becoming useful is that sometimes you can go out, you can go in the streets and all this stuff, and you can see the answers to your problem. They can't afford, can't afford and all these stuff. They'll be like, okay, yeah, these are the makeshift way you use to actually be like, oh, this is going to stop your problem for this time until when you actually have those stuff and be like, oh, those were the days, no, bro. Those were the days when you just go through those stuff and be like, oh, you don't need to repeat those days because what happens that you have things be like, oh, yeah, this was how you just go through. And all these stuff, and it's like, oh, we don't even realize it. And it's like, we don't pass through those days. That's the thing with the light bulb, where it be like, oh, that's something simple. And it's like something simple you take for convenience. No one be like, okay, yeah. So let's have light bulb and turn the light bulb. And this is really a frame of perspective. Be like, oh, these are stuff I usually do. In my grandma's over and stuff like that. I'd be like, oh, it was just normal. It was just normal and stuff like that. I'd be like, oh, what happens that the older you get, if you don't recognize these problems when you actually reach those ages, those stuff will be like issues that you always be dealing with that you could have actually avoided. And be like, oh, cool. So what happens that with everything you're gonna realize that, and that's the reason why I be like, oh, comparative people, sorry, don't rush your progress. Don't rush your progress. When your time comes, it comes. but knowing that these are small steps you do, it'll be like, okay, when you actually reach those levels and do those stuff, it'll be like, oh, when you actually find the right solution, you'll be like, oh, we never go back to those days of going like, you usually use this. You just know that, oh, this. And that's how you be like, oh, those stories are how your grandmother become, or elder becomes an elder. You'll be like, oh, they actually experience those things and you see them living the solution and you'll be like, oh, you see them living the solution and they never go back to not living that solution. And be like, what happened? It's like, yo, they don't, they don't, the lightning strike them twice or whatever. Be like, yo, they don't, as if they don't actually make the thing actually. They learn. That's the thing. I'll be like, oh, that's the thing. That sometimes be like, oh, people, like, all that side, all the mind, like, bro, we don't take those lessons lightly. Every lesson, will be like, oh, we take the lessons and we move on. We take the lesson and we move on. We don't have to. Like legit, we just take the lesson and move on. We don't have no time to this. Yeah, or what? Coming from poverty, bro. That's the thing where be like, oh yeah, we're coming from poverty. You don't have time to be out there. So, well, if you have the luxury of saying all that side out of mind, that means that you actually out there in a time of richness. So like, cool. So that was the thing where be like sometimes that was one of the lessons where I be like, yo, you when you actually in the 40 of ownership and said, and these are lessons where be like, oh, you actually apply these stuff and what happens that when you find a lesson, these are stuff you'll be like, oh yeah, you usually do this stuff, but you don't actually we don't because we acknowledge those stuff and what happens that these are lessons you'll be like, oh, these things are actually obvious and what but once you acknowledge them and you'll be like, okay, this is what we actually going to do. We actually just forget, we don't do it. It's like when we pass those, we'll be like, oh, we just pass through it, and it's like, cool. So it's like, oh, that thing with the light bulb, I'll be like, oh, so reason why we have a lamp, why you, why, so boom, and there's a reason why we're like, oh, you go to university and have things like lamps and all those stuff. In the adult world, you're in your home, there's paying bills and all these stuff. That's the reason why we're like sometimes I talk and all these stuff, and be like, oh, it does make sense because what we're in a new phase, in a new phase. There was the university days. Maybe like, oh, but sometimes you still have things from the university days, and sometimes talk about careers. The episode about career as a luxury. Maybe like, oh, I still have stuff from my university days that I'm still out here, so using. Family still have stuff from years and stuff like that that we still haven't touched the service of things yet. And it's like, cause the simple thing, for example, knife cutter versus knife and stuff like that. Actually just went up and find a knife cutter. And that just 10 times my whole experience in the adult cooking world. And that was like years of things where be like, oh, if I just actually do that, you could actually change the stuff and we're like, oh, but we have the time. What happens is that they don't ignore your up season in the sense that we did actually need at that time we did actually need to know those stuff. And but now that we actually know it, we won't go back to those days. And it's like we don't go back to those days of saying, yeah. Now we know that a can cutter is actually better than in than knife. 10 times better. But it's just that we have to actually know how to actually maintain those items and those things. And then when we actually learn how to maintain those items, we realize that there's actually something better. There's actually something better than the knife. It's the same thing now with the electric bulb and stuff like that. So you go in a home with all this stuff and you see things like lamp and you'll be like, oh, why the hell we all this? Why all this? So why, for example, you grow up and our people be like, oh my god, why the hell we have? And that's thing where these are things we actually consider when you actually become a homeowner. They be like, oh, we have a perfectly good light in the ceiling and all this stuff, and I have like about 10 lamps. Our family give me like 10 lamps or stuff. why the hell we out there to get laps and all these stuff? Why the hell I out there to use all these lights and all these stuff? I'm gonna be like, yo, and I said, these are the things I'll be like, yo, in your road, out of riches or out of poverty, you're gonna realize that people is living a life that you can't even fathom. And it takes to actually reach that level to understand why you're also living that life. And be like, oh yeah. And it's like you can't disrespect them and all. You can't. It's that you actually not reach that level to understand that life. It's like you don't reach that level to understand life. So that's the reason I be like, oh, sometimes I say, oh, yo, it's a living what people are rapping and stuff like that, But you, when you actually reach those levels, no, you're gonna be like, oh, it, it, this, and that's the reason for the podcast. Sometimes be like, oh, I actually have to keep on do this sometimes to be like, oh, cause some people don't realize, yeah, or sometimes people be like, oh, they don't realize that we always are doing these stuff to just like, oh, whoa, what if you, this is everywhere, oh, what if you know a doctor? And yo, there's a casually going out and every day you see more. So casually talking and all this stuff. Boom. You get a you get a seizure and stuff like that. You're like, oh my god. Oh, there's a dying. And it's like, what happened? What happened? And it's like you don't even know how to help you and all this stuff. What happens is that those casual these and this other stuff will be like, oh, these casual things that we always are telling you, we always are repeating. It's like what will happen is that one day we out there's a locks, and somebody come and it's like all these simple lessons that we always ignore because we living off a high that come back and be like, oh, yo, somebody used that and save our ass and it's like, oh, what happened? Yo, all those simple lessons that we ignore in those 4 days, what will happen is that when we become rich, they don't realize that, yo, these were the simple fundamentals that actually made us not be poor. And it's like, we, we actually do not want to go back. If you forget those days, if you forget those days, what will happen is that when a hard time comes and tests us, we don't be like, oh yeah, we don't remember those days. And it's like, cool. But these are where you be like, yo, sometimes we don't it's a waste of time to actually repeat something that's obvious. Like for example, this thing now we're talking about lamps and all those stuff and be like, you hear me talking about lamps and all those. Oh, that makes sense and stuff like that. You have to actually remember you're starting from the basement and all these stuff. So sometimes be like, oh, that's the reason why it's be like sometimes be like, this that's be like, oh, I'm out this in a recording mic and all these things. We actually was starting from there. And here we're talking about boom, 40 year whole ownership compared to another year and all this stuff. Like what happens what will happen is that there will be somebody out here so that will come and ask the same thing. And it's like if we will ask us the same, the same thing when we go there, and that's no, and that's funny thing. I'm like, okay, you out this, and this is the thing where I actually go through the adult years of applying for work. These are stuff every day, and that's the reason why for the podcast. Like, oh, before the podcast, I was somebody else. I was all this going to school and university and things like that. So what will happen is that people would actually see me living the life and be like, yo, I told you these things before, but what happens that you didn't or you completely rejected me or whatever you did a call or something like that at that time. So it's like, oh, I'm out there to call those lessons and not not take them lightly. It's like, oh yo, I actually told you these things. I told you this. It's like, yo, we all just like living this life. We're trying to live this life, right? It's like, oh, when actually see we living this life or trying to escape certain stuff, and be like, oh, you realize that, yo, actually these are the simple things that I was told or be like, oh, I learned on the way to say, yo, boom, we do not want to we do not we out there doing something different. And it's like we never been this before. And that's the thing. It's like we never been this before and it's like cool. So that's the funny thing. Be like, oh, we never been this rich before or stuff, we never been this before or stuff like that. So this episode will be like, oh yeah, these things, this is what happens. So some of be like, oh yeah, it'll be obvious, but it's a obvious lesson to actually redo because what happens that you're coming from somewhere from the bottom, and it's like you do not have the answer is out there, or a better answer is out there. But when you actually get those answers, what will happen is that somebody from the bottom going to be out there, so living that experience and be like, oh, they're gonna live the experience out there, so trying to be out there, so get their home out there, so with 10 lamps and all this stuff, and be like, why the hell am I out there? Why in the world are we out there so using lamps and all this stuff? And then you can actually realize that, oh, um, not because you can do something doesn't mean that you must always do it. And you're going to actually realize that. Boom, it's the same thing like NBA and stuff like that. There's a reason where be like, oh, boom, we can see 10 million people out there so dunking and all this stuff, and they always go for more 10 times out of 10. You see them go for the simple layup, and it's like, wow, what happens? Because every time you actually try to go for a dunk, there's a risk injury. And it's like, there's a putting $1 billion on the line. So it's like, if every time you're out there, so the light bulb go, you go up and take up go on a chair and actually come in and unscrew a light bulb. You're gonna realize there's a risking billions of dollars on the line just to change a light bulb that you pay a couple cents or so, or 100 or whatever you pay for. It's like these are the simple things that you feel that someone you idol or rich or call rich or stuff like that do, but no, what happens is that when they actually reach a level, all these poor lessons is what they actually come here and be like, yo, yeah, and that's pretty like, oh, you'll be like, oh my god, or this idolizing these people and stuff like that. And it's like, no, bro, they actually just got more money than they got yesterday. And it's like, yeah, no, we're richer than we were yesterday. Um, we are closer to finding the solution from yesterday, but just that we're still living in today. So things like the light bulb and stuff like that and lamp. No, I actually find use for the lamp. Where be like, oh, it's good to have used the lamp because what happens that the lamp it's easier to change a lamp bulb than the ceiling bulb, and that actually increase your home safety life. Where be like, you actually this just use that until you actually find a way to actually find a better thing to change the bulb and stuff like that. And be like, cool. When I actually do that now, what happens that the you'll be like, why do we even need a lamp for stuff like that? The lamp can move and stuff like that. So, but at this point, and that's really for each of those episodes, they'll be like, oh, you're gonna see me out as a living experience and be like, yeah, we always put you in the future. Then we live in the reality. Put you in the future, be like, oh yeah, we usually want these stuff. Now we get it. And now we get it. So now you're out there to see yourself living the reality. Be like, cool. We usually want a home and all this stuff. And here we say we live in the home ownership life. And be like, cool. Changing light bulb. Or yeah. And we wanted to get out of the house. Now we actually got out of the house. Now we actually here. And it's like, these are stuff we actually learning and stuff like that. I know he even requires rain and thunder and all this stuff, so you have to remember the rain season episode be like, record and all this stuff. But I guess these are things where be like, yo, yeah, these are offline episodes where be like, yo, the episode for people that not experiencing rain. All these stuff. What happens that one man trash another one trash as they see. So for me out there so experiencing this rain and all this stuff and thunder, there's actually somebody out there so experience the exact opposite or total heat wave. I'll be like, water, bro, water. So by the time coming out there, so we call it water. There's a record experience in the rain season. It's like, oh, they're gonna want to know this. So it's like, yo, so this is the episode, and and just to know that sometimes lightning and all this stuff, but boom, this is the reason if you have lamps in the home, it's actually it's good for you to actually put the bulbs in each where a socket can go to actually get light everywhere to be perfect lighting. I don't want to be in the dark in a home, but at the same time, you do the reason why you would have things use a lamp light more um than than the ceiling light is that it's easier to actually unscrew those light bulbs, change those light bulbs than other ones. So the one this is my rookie talk on it. Yeah, so that's my rookie talk on it now. But no, my things will actually change in more time and all these stuff. Now you come with something else and be like, maybe the one time you actually change it because you don't change it that much. It'll be more risky or stuff like that. Maybe. I'm not sure. But these are my rookie stuff where it'll be like, oh, it's actually convenient to use the lamp light more and all these stuff. And then these are stuff you actually going groceries like, oh, buying the best light. They'll be like, oh, best light and all these stuff. So these guys are things like, okay. But the rain is falling, so I have to stop now. So that's this guy for this episode.
Well, this is the end of the episode. Thanks for watching and look forward for the next episode. To support this podcast, go to anchor.fm/cssb/support or become a sponsor for this episode. If you have a product that you want to have more exposure, DM me on the Instagram page Reframing Mindset Podcast or on Twitter at ReframingP. Either way would help. Thank you regardless for listening, and here's a preview for the next episode.